Good morning. I'm just going to continue with my series looking at the last World Chess Championship between Ding Liren, the defending champion, who here has white, and the challenger, Domaraju Gukesh. In the 11th round, Gukesh won, taking the lead with just 3 more games to go. It would require a miracle by Ding to come back in this situation. Let's see. C4, English opening. This is called the Agincourt defence. It's called the Agincourt defence because C4, the English opening, meets E6, the French defence. So it's, Battle of Agincourt, most famous battle between the English and the French, at least from the English point of view. The French probably have one of their victories as the most famous battle, who knows. Pawn to G3, he's looking to develop his bishop quickly. Pawn is advanced to threaten the c-pawn. Ding ignores this and develops the bishop. If he takes the pawn now, Ding can play check here and win the pawn back immediately. So there's no real threat to win the pawn. So the knight comes to f6 and the knight comes to f3. This is a neo-Catalan defense, no? The pawn comes to d4 and Ding castles. Developing the knight, really, he would like to be playing pawn to c5 to support this first, but feels like he has to get his knight out. I'm not sure how good that is. So, d3, e3 even, develops his bishop, d3, go back. He doesn't want to take because if he takes, then this is taken by the pawn, and then if the queens take, Ding ends up with the rook on the open file, and if the queens don't take, then he's going to move his queen and get his rook onto the open file, so it doesn't do any good. Pushing the pawn to d3, it might look like that pawn will get overwhelmed, but actually the queen can come here to threaten the pawn to b3, and the knight can come to d1, and the pawn gets overwhelmed. You might think, oh well, he can defend with the knight here, but it soon gets chased by a3, and the pawn gets 1. So, not good. He just has to wait. So the bishop comes to e7, and Ding plays d3 to, threaten to take here, bring the queen out, play the bishop here, and then play. Take the pawn, knight takes, queen takes, bishop here, chase the queen away, and then he's in a position to be playing, for example, d4. And no, it doesn't quite work like that because the pawn would be undefended on g7, but something similar. Anyway, he takes back with the bishop, so this pawn is backwards. A lot of the game will now be about how well Ding can advance this pawn. e5 to stop the pawn from advancing. Knight to c3 just to develop, actually. Castles, rook to e1, so that he might be threatening to move the bishop and overwhelm the e-pawn. So he plays to h6 to stop the bishop coming here, because otherwise bishop could come here and then he could just take the e-pawn. He doesn't need to take the knight. So a3 takes away the square from the knight and the bishop. a5, but a queenside expansion. h3, bishop to e6, and king to h2, a happy little retirement home for the king on h2. As often as in these openings where you've castled queenside and played both of these pawns forward, the king naturally belongs on h2, where it's reasonably safe. Rook comes to b1, maybe he's hinting that at some point in time he might like to play b5. Maybe he's just supporting the pawn. Queen comes to c2. Yeah, he's thinking, okay, rook can come here, and then I can push the pawn. Then we can liquidate the centre. And once I've played this, and it's been eliminated, my position is good, is what Ding is thinking. And he's right. Rook comes to e8. Knight comes to b5 instead of rook to d1. Well, it's better on b5. It can't be chased away. It's an outpost and it supports the d4 square. So bishop comes to f5 so that the pawn can't move to d4. It's pinned by the bishop. And it's not so easy as just to chase the bishop away, because it can retreat all the way to here where it's safe on that diagonal. So knight comes to d7. Queen comes to d2, again making it possible to push the pawn to d4. Bishop retreats to d6. And the pawn comes to d4. But the pawn immediately comes to e4. The knight retreats to g1, back where it came from, but it's going to be able to play to e2, and eventually f4, or d4, or c3, or wherever. Knight comes to b6, putting some pressure on the c4 pawn. Queen defends it, good square. Bishop comes to the same diagonal as the king. Queen comes to c2, where it defends the pawn, also puts pressure on this pawn. Of course, can't take this pawn yet because of the attack, discovered attack on the queen, so it has to come up with something. Pawn comes to a4. Yeah, great. It might be that he can think about playing knight here and then knight here into the outpost, b3 outpost. It might be. The knight comes to e2. Maybe he is thinking about coming to c3 and winning this pawn. Bishop comes to g5. And the knight comes to f4. Where it's threatening the bishop and generally making a nuisance of itself. So Gukesh doesn't tolerate that bishop knight there, and he takes with the bishop. Takes back with it. He doesn't want to take with the pawn, even although opening up a line against the king might look useful. You know, it just blocks in this. If the bishop was here, pawns here and here would just say that that bishop is useless. So he doesn't do that. Bishop comes to rook comes to c8, else to defend the c7 pawn, which is now twice attacked. Queen comes to c3, no longer on the same diagonal as the bishop, of course. And the knight comes to b8. The pawn advances, so he didn't just make it to a4, he's made it all the way to d4, he's made it all the way to d5. Queen comes to d7, and the pawn comes to d6. He's he'd be happy to see that pawn taken, because when he takes back with the rook, he's threatening the queen and he's threatening the knight. And if the queen moves, it can't go here because it would still be threatened, so it can't go here because it's covered by the knight, so it would have to go here or here or here, in which case the knight can get taken on b6, so he can't allow that. He can't take it, and he can't allow it to take because it would threaten the knight and threaten the queen at the same time, so he has to play c5. And now suddenly Ding has a pass pawn 2 rows away from queening. Will he be able to force it through? Well, let's see. Knight comes to c7, attacks the rook and increases his control on the e-file. He's now in a position to just take the pawn. The bishop takes, and he takes with the rook, and he's a pawn up. He's in a position to be a pawn up with a pass pawn on the 6th rank. But he feels like he can do better. Oh no, he doesn't. He just takes it. The knight comes to c6, so he kind of You can take the knight, you can take the bishop, or you can just retreat the bishop to allow the rook to have control of the open file. The rook comes to d8. d8. I think he could have played. No, he couldn't have played knight. Forget it. Knight comes to d5. He's trying to take this knight. So knight takes. And now he's got double pawns. Doesn't that make these two pawns weak? Normally it would, but when they're so advanced and they take up so many squares in front of the pawn, no, they're very, very strong actually. They're very, very difficult to break down. So he has to retreat, and of course a pawn disappears. So he comes to c8, really to stop the queen from coming to c7. Queen comes to d5, d4 even, attacking the g pawn. Knight comes to a6, and the rook threatens the queen. Great move. And so is he going to be able to force through the pass pawn? Pawn comes to d7. Yeah, at the minute it won't work to play. Obviously, I can't play to d8. Gets taken. It won't work to play a rook here for the because he can take, and then the queen takes. So the rook comes to c4 to threaten the queen. Queen comes to e3, and now he is threatening to play rook here, and he can't stop the he can't take, because when he takes back the queen will be supported. So is he forcing the pawn through? Rook comes to c2. Maybe he's looking at creating some counterplay by playing queen takes on b2. Bishop comes to d6, brilliant, where it's on the same line as the queen, the rook, so that if that rook moves, the rook on e8 is attacked. So he plays f6, and Gukesh takes. Ding takes, and Gukesh resigns. If he takes with the king, then rook here check, queen here check wins the rook and gets a pawn. If he takes with the if he doesn't, well then he's just a pawn down, and the bishop's going to get taken, and he's still in danger of forcing through the passed pawn. So he doesn't have any choice. He has to resign. Fantastic. Ding has created the comeback. So after 12 of the 14 games they're scheduled to play, the score is level again. Anybody's game. Yeah, okay. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my videos.